prepare the YouTube. Meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. All right, we're ready then.
Great.
Nick, thank you so much. So I recovered the hostship or?
Yes. Now on to the next one.
Okay, and I give it to, as soon as we finish, I give it to Erica once I finished, so I can leave and you're the host.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you, Nick. Wait just one more minute that everyone is. And how long, Kyriakos, how long are you staying in Houston?
We just had our final last week. So
Okay.
I'm going back to Athens on Monday and coming back for fall.
Okay. And the vaccination, how is vaccination there in Houston?
I had mine, so it's been moving.
Great. Yeah, we're in the south, so we were not expecting to be as well performing as the northern.
Oh yes,
but we're doing well, not bad.
I've spent most of my time in Austin, to be honest.
Okay.
Advantage of the format. So here it actually, I don't know. It's very. They've been super careful, and I think the majority has been vaccinated.
That's great. Okay, since it's 2:30, maybe we can start. So the idea here is that the students are having 7 minutes or so to explain what they have done during the semester and having a conversation about pros, cons, and where to push further the project. You will see a combination, as I said, of second year undergrad and first year grad that have past 3.5 years, so that they have a different past that is outside the discipline, and that they're like first big course in a way. Okay, so I leave it to Erica. You can take us there.
Okay. Thank you, Margarita. You have to, I can't share the screen.
No, that should be automatically given. That's it. No problem.
Yeah.
Okay, co-host.
No, todavía.
No, wait. Now.
Oh, here we go. You can see my screen, right?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. And you see it changing, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Hi, my name is Erica. I'm a first-year undergrad under the guidance of Professor Jover. I'm sorry, I'm not an undergrad. I'm a graduate. I'm off to a great start. Under the guidance of Professor Jover. This semester, we was focused on designing a collective housing unit that created opportunities for mixed use, collective amenities, and mixed income to cohabitate within an urban block. In creating the design for my intentional community, I wanted to avoid a prescriptive theme based on shared interest, as is the typical narrative of intentional communities. My thinking is we need less tribalism. So instead, I started my design by analyzing which features make for the most desirable experiences within the urban landscape. A robust neighborhood with vibrant people, with vibrant public spaces, easily accessible, green space, but also private access to outdoor space, as well as a short commute time. This is how I came to the name The Corner, in the sense that it is a coming together of many people but it is also a reference to the geometry of the right triangle, which I explored. To better understand the efficiency of communal living and small spaces, we designed 3 homes: the horizontal, the vertical, and the sectional. Both the horizontal and the sectional homes directly inform the design of the urban block, both in keeping with the design features, but also further exploring the geometry. The horizontal home was a 14,000 square foot home designed for a family of 5. The design was based on a Riyadh-style inner courtyard with several porches off the private rooms. The sectional home was also 1,400 square feet with a narrow footprint at the ground that evolved into rotating right triangles. The site, which was considered, is a populated, vibrant area with 3 existing properties. Like most of New Orleans, the porch culture is part of the built experience throughout the neighborhood, and I was cognizant in continuing this custom. The precedent. The scheme has evolved a good bit since my conceptual inspiration was Jean Renaud's housing complex in France. I was fascinated by the mesh that was created within the structure and the other spaces. I wanted to encapsulate this to fit within an urban block. I read that the architect also designed pocket gardens at the time, on each of the balconies, containing a depth of soil sufficient to grow trees. So it's very interesting to see how this has evolved. The ground floor features almost a perimeter of public spaces accessible via the sidewalk. Inlets within the folds of the building create space for outdoor activities, specifically outdoor seating for cafes and restaurants. One can access the vertical core from the sidewalks to enter the living space on the floor above. These vertical cores can also be accessed from the inner courtyard. There are 5 entrance points to the inner courtyard. To allow for greater privacy, the corner of the entrances are all set for community use, not to public use. The building in the inner courtyards are designated for community access for programs such as office space, gym, and clubhouse. The various walkways were created by extending the geometry of the structures, creating meandering pathways, and providing for easy circulation throughout the site. Forming a strata of jagged volumes, the second and third floors are alternating but similar in distribution, maximizing sunlight exposure. I mentioned I drew inspiration from the culture of porches. All of the units feature one large triangular terrace off the living room that looks out onto the street direction, and the private space orients to the courtyard and features smaller, more private porches. On the 4th floor, I designed units that feature home offices with completely private entrances for clients or employees. I felt the growing necessity of home office after the year that we've kind of had. There are 3 typologies, and over to the right is how the different units are allocated within the space. Vegetation and green space were huge considerations. In increasing density, I wanted to be mindful of not designing a concrete jungle. Instead, inner courtyards are envisioned as a green oasis with varying sizes and degrees of courtyards. So this is a view from inside the courtyard. This is the corner of Berrine and Jean Street. And I wanted to kind of represent how the how the building interacts with the rest of the community. The facades on the ground floor are glass. And then this is a view from the 4th floor. The views were also important in consideration in designing the small porches. Balconies were arranged to allow neighborhoods to socialize from one balcony to the next. This is the axon, which shows how it fits within the urban context. And one final view from Jean Street. Thank you.
Thank you. Can someone post the concept board chat on everyone's? That would be great.
I don't actually have the concept board.
Okay.
I'll
Oh.
start with
Me,
maybe a
yeah.
question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Erica, for this presentation. It's interesting to see Jean Renaudy coming back and kind of in as a reference in architecture schools. My first question will be about materiality and the use of concrete. I like the way you are thinking about the units and the use of the diagonals and the creation of the terraces and the kind of outdoor courtyard, communal courtyard in the back. The materiality is very different, as you know, using the concrete in New Orleans is not something that is common. And it, you know, it's obviously you made that choice. Can you talk a little bit more about why concrete and how do you see that contrast play out in the context of New Orleans?
So it's kind of ironic that we just finished a sauna class and how
Yes.
this is such a loaded question.
In so many ways.
I know. Because I understand that for them, materiality was just the starting point, and that's where the design started from. If I'm going to be honest, that wasn't my starting point. Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I mean, concrete is kind of an odd choice for the area, the site context. I thought it fit within the design of the building. So let me say that I did the design of the building and then considered the material afterwards, which I know is.
So it is an interesting, you know, conversation to have. And to me, the question of materiality in the context is a really interesting, you know, one. As you know, as you know from our conversations during the seminar with the work of Sana, they put a lot of emphasis on materiality. And in my practice, you know, also I think materiality is really important. And if you think of my house, we were just talking about it. Formally, the house is unusual in the context of New Orleans. And I thought it was important to bring it back to domesticity through the use of wood, charred, even if it's charred wood, but there is something more domestic about wood in the context of New Orleans versus the, some other materials that were suggested to me when I was doing the project. When I was doing a project in a historic context, and we were kind of almost forced to use formally more traditional forms, the idea was to use concrete for the house. And to me, that contrast or that play on materiality and how materiality is implemented in a project is really important. And in your project, I really like the project and how you worked on the units and all the outdoor spaces, balconies, and the green space. I'm just concerned a little bit about the choice of the concrete and how that would you know, be perceived or experienced in the context. Going back to Renaudy and you know his work, there is you know if you visit France and some of his projects in the outskirts of Paris. There is a kind of a feel of brutalist architecture in you know in the scale and in the use of concrete, and I'm just a little bit concerned that in this context, you know, I think the image you're showing us is really interesting, and the difference in scale between the house, the one-story house, and your building. There is something to me that could be very interesting about this. I'm just worried a little bit about your choice of concrete and the use of concrete for this project.
I just posted the image of your house, Amar, so we can all have that in mind. Kyriakos can see it if you all want to refer to.
Thank you,
anyway.
Margarita. I don't know if you want to answer this or get into this conversation, Erica. Try to elaborate a little bit more on materiality.
It was now like that you say it, I'm like, oh my God, yeah, concrete is completely the right, if I could be honest. It was actually an afterthought, concrete. I was very worried with the structure fitting into the surrounding neighborhoods as this was being designed. That was kind of my primary concern. And it felt like it only came together once the 3D modeling started. So yeah, I don't know how, I mean, now that you say that, I don't think concrete fits well within the...
I mean, it is an interesting conversation to have, and the idea of materiality, it is very common that as architects, we think about a design, and then the idea of materiality comes at a later point in the design. And I would like to put the idea of materiality in the forefront of a design. And the sooner you think about the materiality of the project, the more there is, the concept of the project and its materiality should work together, as we talked about it many times with the work of Sana. So just for future references, I mean, now you finished the semester, and I think that, again, I think there are a lot of qualities for this project. That would be my, my critique at this point for the project. But I'm going to stop here and let some other people intervene.
Well, I think that the question of materiality is a valid one. It's kind of, and I mean, I'm not intending to generalize here, but it's quite common to see that in early architecture studios. That thing where the student is forced to make a choice about materiality, which arrives at the end of the process. I think is also maybe a little bit of an effect of our digital world, that it's very easy to apply materials on buildings. And at the same time, construction has arrived to, I mean, material technology has arrived to a point that you could physically build any kind of form and clad it with any kind of material. So I think it's a very important conversation to be, to have, and to kind of be able to navigate between those ambiguities and multiplicities of what materiality means today. In Les Etoiles, which is your reference, it's very straightforward. It's a concrete building, and concrete is expressed in this kind of brutalist way. But this means that the materiality and the structure is actually the same thing, right? It's a system. We don't know what your project is in terms of that, in terms of structure. Is it made of concrete? Is it made of wood and clad with concrete panels? I mean, these are very, very interesting questions. I think there's also a question of form of.
Can you go perhaps to the plan or something that you guys have seen that?
Deciding to work with these triangular spaces that produce sharp intersections and create a very particular kind of interaction between the elements of the program, between the different units. I'm not sure, and I mean, I would have to
look at the other plan, the plan below, which is more of a typical floor plan, and perhaps zooming in, you can see the units. Or you don't have a like a typical floor plan, like third floor or something. Yeah, that one. Oh, not that. Yeah, zoom in a bit more.
I mean, I
yeah, okay, enough, but at least full screen.
I think, for example, I would be very interested in understanding better how the kind of vernacular of the rectangular porch which is prominent in New Orleans. How does it translate here? Because that has a very kind of a particular frontal orientation. Here you're shifting things and creating these very complex, very interesting spaces. But I think there's also some sort of interiority in the kind of spaces that this operation produces. Is we see, for example, a lot of those windows through the triangular balcony, they're facing walls, so they're much more private than a porch, which naturally kind of opens up around the building. So would you like to talk to us about this a little more?
So certainly the balconies, a lot of thought went into the balconies as far as what would be an appropriate size for public out onto the street, balconies going into the courtyard, balconies that were primarily for private use, so off of bedrooms, whereas other balconies were obviously not the size of a typical New Orleans porch. The public one, the ones out that were open to the street, but it was kind of to be, the idea was that there would be interaction with the street through these balconies, both on a public level, the ones on the street, and then within the community, they're close enough that you can see the various balconies, the people on the various balconies.
I think there is, and it's very interesting what you're suggesting. I think there's an important difference that you have to realize, that when in the traditional porch, for example, the building wall, the window is parallel to the face of the porch. Here you're proposing a rotation, basically, where the window looks to a certain direction and then the balcony looks to another direction by the triangle, which it produces, in my view, a very different kind of experience. Like there is a filter, the balcony becomes a filter, and somebody can choose to be open, to be on the balcony and expand their view, their field of view, and be very social. But at the same time, being inside, it becomes very private and very kind of almost secluded, which I think is a very interesting quality in this design. But I'm not sure how much you have realized it, like how much you're able to articulate it, as a quality and as a driving force in constructing, in designing this project.
Mm-hmm.
I think the idea of the 45-degree angle in general in architecture, the use of it is tricky, because most of the time the architecture that comes out of it is very difficult to work with. You know, it's a constraint more than anything else. I think you did a good job. If I'm looking at the units and how you design the units, I think you did a very good job at addressing this this issue and coming up with fairly good layout for the units. My question with that, and I imagine, I mean, it's only one semester, and you know, there's a lot to think about and tackle in one semester. But maybe for the future also, one thing that you can start to consider is, as you're working with this idea or the rotation of the plan, think about the orientation of the units. They seem to be, you know, copy and paste with little variations. But if you if you think of the orientation of the units in relationship to light, sun, directionality, you might start to iterate and play with a variety of layout or ways of setting up the units and the balconies and the overhangs and the shading devices that you create with the balconies. That is a little bit more specific to the orientation.
Okay.
I know that I just said, zoom it to the to one of the units, but now if you zoom back to the to the block, or what we're seeing here, it seems that there is not a lot of variety between, let's say, the east, south, north, and west in terms of the units. And we know that in this context, in the context of the city, water is a very important aspect, but also the orientation of any architecture in relationship to the sun, and it is also a key one that you can work with and get something out of it architecturally.
Yeah. So we need to close here to move into the next. So Erica, you're the host of this room. So if you touch, you have to be a co-host successively following the agenda. So Elizabeth will take us to her, and then you may co-host us. Okay. That's
good job, Erica. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm leaving to the other room. Enjoy. Have a nice moment.
Thanks, Margarita. Bye.
Bye.
See you later.
Okay, Erica, I think you have to make me a co-host so I can share screen.
Okay, give me a second. I'm like literally the worst person who they could have left in charge of this.
Erica, I had to do it earlier. You click the arrow on the share screen button and you click multiple participants or something like that.
Oh, I love you, Georgia. Okay, here we go. It should work now.
Okay, can you all see that?
Yes.
All right. Hi, my name is Elizabeth Kiegler. I'm in Sensolis Vela section, and I titled this project Deconstructed Tessellation to offer the concept of an abstracted geometric system within a natural environment. And so the isometric shows the introduction of topography and organic landscape on the site in juxtaposition to the complex geometries of the building structure. And this is my exploration in the vertical home project, where I focused on protruding box elements from the vertical core, and on the right side is the porch analysis project. The main concept I used in the horizontal home project was inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright's triangle plan projects, and I overlaid and pulled apart triangles atop a grid system to create a unique geometric atmosphere. The horizontal home laid out the groundwork for the design concept of the sectional home, where I utilized the same grid system and stacked the triangular blocks in a cascading form to create rooftop terraces at each level. And both the horizontal and sectional home projects propelled the design for the collective housing project as a basis for the unit plans and structure. So the site of this project lies on a grid divided into 9 blocks, and south of the site is a school, and there are 3 buildings that will remain on the site sorry. They are a coffee shop in the northwest quadrant, a steakhouse in the northeast, and a private residence in the south. So this diagram describes the preliminary design for placing housing units among the 3 pre-existing buildings, and the perimeter line surrounding the triangles represents the envelope around the collective housing. The diagram on the left here is the current secure ground condition that has very minimal green space surrounding the existing home. And on the right shows the proposed changes of introducing topography and water and the new building massing with an emphasis on double height and triple height courtyard spaces embedded within the unit blocks. Here is the current and proposed changes in vegetation showing the trees that would be relocated and the newly planted trees. The type of community for this project is intended to house students, couples, or small families and encourages an active and outdoor lifestyle. There is a lot of opportunity for interaction between neighbors and plenty of outdoor space for gathering. I was inspired by the alternating rooftop terraces utilized in the terrace house in Germany by NL Architects, and I was also drawn to the atmospheric qualities of this illustration by Dominika Kubica. So the central park and circulating river is surrounded by the units and public amenities and enveloped by the outer facade. From the street, the complex geometries of the interior space is hidden and revealed upon entry to the site. The ground level plan is organized with the public amenities around the perimeter of the site, separating the units from the street. To create more privacy for the individual residents, there are reflecting pools embedded in the first level terrace that extend up to the unit windows, creating a natural divide. It also gives each unit its own porch and provides some natural cooling. There's open space with a couple of amenities for the public on the southwest quadrant because, as we saw in the site analysis, there's a school located on the block south of the site, and that way the space is open to the public and invites people to enter the park. This is the second level plan. Each unit is oriented so that the windows face an exterior view or open up to a private balcony. To access the second level, one would take the stairs or elevator and arrive at a second street that further provides opportunity to engage with your neighbors, and you can see this shaded in a darker gray. The third level is unique due to the 2 pools that bridge between the 2 different residential complexes, and the glass bottom of the pools create a dynamic reflection on the structure and ground below. These are some close-up views of the plans, and as you can see, the rooftops of each level function as the second and third level terraces that circulate around the courtyard voids. This section cuts through the topography in relationship to the units and shows the double and triple height voids in the unit blocks. These spaces are for courtyard vegetation and provide light to the homes and amenities on site. Here, the section cuts through the third level pool and 2 of the unit blocks. You can also see how the total height of the project does not exceed that of the existing buildings remaining on the site. And since it's a little confusing to read the different angles of the units in section, I tried a section perspective view to give some more visual depth. And this section cuts at an angle through more of the courtyard voids and better shows the exterior envelope on the right side. You can see that these it has cutouts to frame views from the inside and gives a glimpse of the building from the street. This last section again cuts through the central topography showing the relationship to the units. And you can also see the gym on the right side with a double height rock wall visible through the facade from the street. Here's a diagram showing the primary and secondary points of entry into the central park, and the main axes come from the southern corners of the site and the northeast corner. Off of these axes are the strips of vertical cords, each with an elevator and a set of stairs, which also are diagrammed here in this exploded axon view. This first perspective is a view from the street depicting the outer facade and one of the main entry points into the community. Here is a view from inside a unit looking out at the park and the terrace seating area. This shows the third level pool and its relationship to the upper level units. And this perspective illustrates the park environment and the active lifestyle. So since the housing project is intended for students, the majority of units are small typology with 1 bedroom, 1 bath. And because of the layout of the communal terraces, there's a lot of opportunity to engage with your neighbors still. The medium unit typology has 2 bedrooms, 2 baths with varying views from each bedroom. And the largest units all have an interior courtyard to provide more light, and each bedroom has either a private terrace or a view of the park and water. This diagram represents the cross ventilation of each unit topology. And here this shows the wet areas in the first floor units of the southern complex. So the orientation of the triangles maximizes the proximity of the wet areas together. And then this is again the axon, and I can switch over my screen to share my animated axon. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Great presentation, very interesting work. I'm going to keep going with my maybe theme this afternoon in materiality. It seems that you worked on some type of screen system on the outside where the commercial spaces are, and there is something else happening where the units are in the back. Is that correct?
Sorry, oh, I can go back to that slide. For materiality, I was thinking, here, do you mean in this?
Yes.
I was thinking, yeah, about using a perforated metal for the outer shell facade, just so that it provides like light in an interesting pattern on the structure inside, and also kind of gives kind of a protecting outer shell for the entire community. And I was inspired by Jonathan Tate with his perforated metal. We had a field trip earlier this semester to one of his projects, and that's why I chose this type of perforated metal for the facade here. And then on the inside, I'm not an expert on materials yet. I'm excited to learn more about that next semester, but I was thinking kind of just a plain material that wouldn't distract too much because it already is such a complex geometry. I wouldn't want to make it too extravagant with like a really exciting material. I'm not sure though.
And on the first floor facing the street, it's all commercial spaces opening to the street?
Yeah, around, it's easier to see in plan. I can go up to that. The first one. In green here, you can see those are all the public amenities. So it would be like a juice bar, bookstore, a yoga studio, and a gym. And so that kind of creates a separate divide between the street and the units on the inside.
And then as you go up, there are some units that come all the way to the edge of the property.
Yeah, on the second and third floor, they do go up and extend to the edge.
Great. I think it's really a very interesting use of the site, and the organization is very well thought out. I have another question about that water that is, besides the pools that are on the third level, on the ground level, it seems that you have some water feature that is running in the middle of the courtyard and around the building. Can you describe what that water is and what is it doing?
Yeah, so I wanted to have this kind of central park area for the residents that had a little bit more of a divide from the outside, just because you can see like in the southwest quadrant, it's very, very open to the public because there is a school, so it's inviting people to come in there. But then the more central area is divided by that river, just to give it a little more of a divide, I guess, between the very public and just the residential public space. And then also the small reflecting pools are all located where the windows are to the units, just so that people couldn't walk up to someone's window. It gives a little bit more of a natural divide and privacy.
Is that connected at all to some water retention or water management on site?
Yeah, I did. The river also is because I introduced topography, so it would be kind of a runoff collection, and it would kind of create more of a circulation to create a natural cooling system. Not an expert in that either, but I was just kind of thinking ahead how that could work to function as like a water runoff collection area, and again, from like the upper buildings, those pools can collect water as well through a sort of system of drainage.
I think it's a really nice project. I think that there's a lot to it, and again, you know, you're working with triangles, which are not usually easy in architecture to organize something with, you know, 45-degree angles. It's a,
Right.
you know, once you start, you realize that it's more difficult than you think to come up with spaces that are usable and functional. And I think, you know, looking at your units, you did a very good job. So it's only going to get easier from here on for you. You did that hard part. Overall, I think it's a very good and successful project. I like the materiality and how you use that screen on the outside as an element. I mean, you know, you can also think about the ironwork and in the French Quarter and this idea of filtering light and creating some type of privacy to the users and that are using these outdoor spaces on the upper levels, but also how it unifies the building. And one can just imagine, you know, throughout the day and the different qualities of light and how the screen will be very lively and different in different light conditions. So overall, I think it's a very successful project. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes, I would agree. I was really impressed with the floor plans. They seem to be very well resolved on a unit level, with like a you know, like a very mature kind of and consistency, a lot of maturity and consistency in subdividing spaces, allocating programs at the right location. So I think, yeah, I mean, I would agree, like, yeah, that your units are very impressive on the level of development you have achieved. Now, I think there's some ambiguities about the project in terms of how these units are arranged in layers. Of course, it's a very complex floor plan, so it's hard to grasp it three-dimensionally in such a short span. But I guess the idea is that you're proposing this kind of plazas in the air where somebody can circulate freely and access the different units. Is that how you imagine it?
Yeah, I was thinking because most of the units are single bedroom, it would be a good opportunity to have like these larger terraces and outdoor spaces where people can gather and like see their neighbors and stuff like that, just because it is kind of a lot of one bedroom apartment units. So I wanted to create more space, and instead of just filling every area with more units, have these outdoor areas for people to gather.
So I'm wondering how these spaces could be further programmed or further developed to become more than just additional circulation, but basically imagining that life expanding to the exterior. I think as defined your interior spaces are, which they are a lot, your outdoor spaces, and I'm talking about the levels above the ground, like on the building. It's unclear. They're empty, for example. There's no furniture. There could be there are indications of some sort of life or activity.
Yeah, I agree. I think for the development of these illustrations, I would include more. Here I began in the close-up plan because it's a little bit harder to read in such a zoomed-out plan.
Right.
I added some tables for people and kind of more vegetation to create more life. But I agree, it would be more interesting and beneficial to have some designated programs.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I like the fact that they are unprogrammed. You know, it reminds me a little bit of, you know, Chumi and Le Fresnois, his project in Le Fresnois and other projects he worked on, where he talks about these unprogrammed spaces. And if we're talking about housing for students, and you can be assured that students will make use of that space, whether it's, you know, for gathering. Sometimes, you know, it's as architects, we want to program, you know, over program everything and have, you know, be a little bit too over heavy handed in saying, this is how people will use that space. And this is how people are supposed to act or react in that space. And, you know, obviously to me, the question, you know, when you're building space, the space has a cost to build space. And the more you build unprogrammed spaces, you know, it will be hard to kind of make your case. You have to make your case for whoever is developing this project to pay the extra cost for a space that is unprogrammed, not rentable. I mean, you know, any developer or person building something like that, they want to optimize their investment and say, how am I using this space that I'm paying for? And to me, that quality that comes with the spaces, these outdoor spaces, is really interesting. I imagine, you know, student life and students in that space where they have a relatively small units and giving them that outdoor space where they can put a ping pong table if they want to, or put, you know, a barbecue if that permitted, you know, for safety reasons, or just or have a party, whatever this kind of, or have a performance, you know, whatever that idea of, you know, how the space can be used as a kind of buffer zone for the small units, I think it is really interesting. And I would like to just say, let's not program it too much. Let's, you know, let's let the occupants have that breathing room outside and see how they would use it in different circumstances and different times and so on and so forth.
Well, but just to clarify, my comment was not suggesting specifically programming this space, but exactly what you described, Amar, to actually being able to visualize that. So imagine these activities, these barbecues, these gatherings, these parties, this is happening on the floor plan. Like that would make the floor plan much more alive and vibrant. In the kind of, I think your plans, as perfect they are in their resolution of the unit and the furniture, and I'm suggesting this also because I see that you have the skill to do it. I would expect them to become a little more diverse, a little more unexpected, where, you know, the table is maybe slightly off and there are people in there and somebody has left their things inside. So it's more of a snapshot of an everyday of an everyday life rather than this perfect image of this ideal situation that, of course, never exists. And I think it will be very interesting for you to explore these dynamics that your project is proposing.
Okay, yeah, I like that idea of maybe adding people and such. I do want to make it more of like a live image. I agree. That's a good idea.
I think we're in agreement here, Kyriakos. I just sometimes like to pretend that we're disagreeing so we can have a conversation. Maybe this is, you know, the French in me that like to disagree just to build an argument. But no, you know, to be serious, I think it will be interesting to build it in your narrative. If you know, if you create these spaces, make it part of your project. As you're describing your project, you know, I was referencing Chumin, and are you familiar with Bernard Chumi?
I don't believe I am.
You know,
Look
up
Parc de
his
la Villette,
Parc de
Elizabeth.
la Villette. Yeah, he did
Yeah,
Parc de la
you
Villette. He
have
did.
seen some diagrams of him in the
Oh,
lecture.
okay.
That park is from that.
Oh, I
Yeah.
think I remember. I know what you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, in some of his projects, he talks a lot about these unprogrammed spaces, specifically in a project called Le Frénois that he did. It's an art school. So to me, it will be interesting to, more than in the drawing, because the drawings have tendency to fix things and say, if you start putting a ping pong table, people think that that's the only use of that space. But more in the presentation of your project, or, you know, in your diagrams, because you showed the circulation in Axon and how people navigate the space. You showed the units, you showed the what areas are. I think that could be another one of those diagrams where you call it unprogrammed spaces, and, you know, point at it as, you know, as something that is intentionally designed that way. You thought about it, and you do not want it to be too specific, rather than, you know, starting to, and you can go on and start imagining scenarios, but if you start doing that, you have to show more than one, you know, how the versatility of that space and how these spaces can be used in different conditions.
Do we have more time
Yeah, we have 11 minutes more if you want.
Oh, great. Well, another question is, well, if you can zoom out, or we can see the full floor plan again. Would you like to explain to us a little better your decision to leave that corner unbuilt?
This, I don't know if you can see my mouse, the southwest corner.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that's because there is a school, like an elementary school, in this quadrant below, and so that means there will be a lot of people in circulation and kind of busy street life there. And so I figured that would be like the most active and loud and area of the whole site, and so that's why I decided to keep the units over in this area and have this be an open park space. And I chose to have like a covered play area, an enclosed play area, and then an ice cream shop, just to provide some more amenities for the public space, and kind of have a separate park that's a little bit more for the public, and then, you know, this interior park for the residents. But that also gives a lot of views into the park and into the community. Kind of invites like people to come in across bridge, like the connection between the residents and the public.
Well, I'm wondering, because I see you make this move with a screen that defines a very precise border, a very precise outline for the project, and that courtyard is somehow kind of like a hidden world in there. And I'm wondering if some gesture could happen on that part to define maybe more privately this interior world, but also potentially become an opportunity for a smaller building, one that is maybe outdoor. Maybe it's sort of a trellis construction that indeed collaborates with the school across the street and the traffic, and maybe parents can wait for their children under some trellises there, working with the ice cream shop. I mean, obviously, it's I guess it's an extra to the brief, to what you were asked to do here, but I think it will be a very interesting kind of intervention there, which would help you on one hand to better define this interior world, that you're trying to build, and on the other hand, to create a more substantial intervention there at this corner, considering also the context, which I think is a very smart thing, a very smart idea that you're proposing.
I agree. I definitely think maybe one thing that I could do if I were to further develop this would be maybe create a rock wall, because in this gym, like the whole concept is based off an active lifestyle and outdoor space. And so maybe create a rock wall, you know, kids could play there after school and stuff like that. And that would also create kind of more of an enclosure, possibly.
One of the premises of the project was the densifying the blocks. Was there a specific number of units that was required?
Yeah, so we were told 60 units. I think there was a little bit of variation, but mine is exactly 60 units, with a majority of them being, I can go to the pragmatic sheet. I have 45 small units, I believe, and then, yeah, 8 medium units and 7 large units.
Because it appears, looking at, you know, the site plan or the floor plan, it appears very light footprint on the site. It's, you know, it's amazing that you were able to fit in the 60 units, and there you can imagine how you can easily add more units if needed,
Right.
on that corner, or you know, in other places. And I think part of it also it has to do with, you know, the way you're breaking the corners, you're breaking away from the corners and letting people in. That's an interesting choice, but also the kind of commercial or amenities on the ground floor and the units that are above. So that's, you know, it's still a relatively tall building if you think about it in the context, but the treatment through materials and how you arrange the units more towards the back of the block helps a lot in minimizing the visual impact of the density. So these are, you know, these are good points in terms of how you're resolving the issue, because you can imagine if everything was fronting the sidewalk, the building will appear out of context in, you know, or massive in scale, considering the height. I imagine you're going to the height limit, which is around 45 feet or so.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the New Orleans height limit is, but I tried to keep it in relation to the buildings on the site and the buildings around it as well.
Good, great. Do you have any questions for us?
I guess maybe for, like, I was debating whether or not to do sections or section perspectives or elevations. I don't know. I'm really interested in digital renderings and kind of illustrating things. I don't, if you had any advice on kind of how I could further develop these in a way.
Because of the 45 degree that you're using, it's really hard to
Yeah.
to work with. You know, the sections are very beautiful, but they, you know, they tell us a story about the units. They talk about, you know, the interior spaces versus the outdoor spaces, and you know, so on and so forth. But it's hard to grasp the project with the conventional drawing. So you might think about ways of representing the project, whether it's, you know, through isometric views or something that further describe, you know, the comment of Kyriakis earlier about it's hard to grasp the three-dimensionality of the project. There's a lot of complexity, right, and that complexity is due to the 45-degree angle and the shifting from one level to the other. So I don't think whether it's section perspective or traditional sections will do justice to, or, you know, help understand that. I think isometric views like this one, and if you start to do it at multiple levels and you know, some kind of exploded views or physical, you know, the old-fashioned physical models are always a good also way of describing a project of this nature.
Okay, yeah, I agree.
Well, since you brought up the question of elevation, I actually have one more question for you regarding the way you render it and the decisions in the materials. And basically, when we look from the inside, like from the courtyard side, all these triangle spaces, they have this very almost Mediterranean look, like it's white stucco. They seem to be very thick and heavy. But then when we look at the plans are suggesting a much more lightweight type of architecture. The exterior walls are very thin. They're large openings. Also, if we look at your references from Frank Lloyd Wright, is suggesting a more layered architecture, which is also, I mean, what your concept is about, like with all these platforms that that we've been talking about earlier. So I'm wondering if there could be a maybe a different way to look at the project as a more a less volumetric approach, and maybe one that is emphasized on the kind of planes that construct this three-dimensional space. Or if this is what we're interested in, then I would suggest kind of trying to elaborate on this thickness and exploit it literally also from the interior by trying to create a thicker poche, like thicker walls that potentially hide storages and equipment inside to kind of increase that depth. And that more cave-like, well, maybe not cave-like, but more volumetric image that you're suggesting with the interior views of the courtyard.
Okay, I think that we need to move to the next student. I'm sorry, Kyriakos.
Just a quick comment, last comment about the isometric view that you were showing and the treatment of the fenestrations, the opening in that screen that you have on the street facade. I think the idea of using the openings that are not directly in correlation with the apartments, but start to have a different scale of their own and tell a different story. I think it's a really interesting strategy. And you can even further that by not necessarily working with the levels, the 3 levels that you have, but combining different levels or shifting those openings to create something that help also in terms of the scale of the building to minimize the impact of that height. Good work.
Thank you so much.
Hello, Amar. Hello,
Hi, Andrea.
Kyriakos.
Hello.
Elizabeth, can you make me co-host, but not this one that I'm talking off of, my other account?
Yes. Do you know how to do that?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yes, you have to go to the people that is participating to the list, and whenever you see all the names,
You have to share screen, basically.
yes, you make them co-host.
Okay.
Elizabeth,
Wait, I think I can do it too. Wait, never mind.
Sorry, I'm not sure. Do I do that under participants?
In participants, in each name, whenever you are on the name, you will see more with an arrow. You click more in the arrow.
I don't see it where it says more, but you're also a co-host, Professor Bardan, so I think you can also do it. I'm not.
No, I think it's Erika Gutman, the one who has to do it, because I'm seeing in the list, the host is Erika. Erika, can you do it, please?
yeah,
yeah.
I did it, but I added Elizabeth, so now Elizabeth needs to.
No. You have to add Will and Bree.
But I had already added Elizabeth.
I think you have to unadd me and add Will instead as a co-host.
Wait, I'm going to share my screen. Eric, I think we need your help because you are the host right now. So if you can please make Will and Bree co-host. You are the only one who can do it.
I only see that I've added Elizabeth as it allows you dual host. So now Elizabeth needs to take it, and it's a under share screen. There's a column there, a tab that says there's a little arrow, and next to the arrow it says multiple participants. If you could just click on that, Elizabeth.
I'm looking at I clicked share screen and it just says, is it under advanced?
I will share my screen to show her. Okay. Let me try it. Go here.
I can also share my screen to show you, and you can tell me what button.
Yes, please.
Okay, let me.
I'm sorry about these problems.
Sorry.
I'm so sorry. There's nothing I can do on my end though.
Okay, let me go.
Erica, can you please make someone else the host, not the co-host, make me the host.
Okay, let's take everyone off.
So whenever you go to my name, make me host, not co-host.
How about now? I think it should allow everyone.
Yes.
Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
I'm so sorry, that was my fault. I'm the worst person they could have put in on this.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, let's begin. Hi, my name is Will Embry. My professor this semester is Andrea Bardendatena, and today I'll be presenting an aggregate housing community in the Garden District of New Orleans. The title of the project is Rome, Sweet Rome. Wait, sorry. Redefining what it means to be houseless. The intentional community chosen for this project is Nomads, an underrepresented community in New Orleans. I chose Nomads as the intentional community because I'm captivated by their mobile way of life and want to promote the difference between being homeless and being houseless. This product will accommodate 4 different types of nomads. First, auto nomads, those who live and travel in auto homes or RVs. Second, digital nomads. New Orleans was named the best city for digital nomads in 2017, making the city an ideal location for this project. Third, peripatetic nomads, those who live and travel in tents. And finally, fourth, leasee nomads, an unfamiliar type of nomads to New Orleans as there are currently no nomadic housing communities in Louisiana. Nomadic people build and choose their homes to reflect and facilitate a lifestyle based on movement. And it was the first product of the semester in which I recreated drawings of an airstream that inspired me to further investigate their roving way of life and explore nomadic architecture. The buildup of this project is derived from previous projects in which I have been challenging myself to design around primitive geometry. The horizontal home design was in the shape of an octagon in which I was exposed to both obtuse and acute angles and created a division of spaces for the children and parents and their guests. The vertical home was a house inside of a tree in which I used circular floor plans and radial organization to create a home for 5 college students taking classes on Zoom. In the sectional home, I explored primitive shapes in both the vertical and horizontal planes, using exterior walkways and stairs to connect the different spaces. In this project, I sought out design elements inherent to the city of New Orleans. I found the most compelling elements to be exterior patios, iron railings, and cast iron columns. In addition to designing this product with elements of commercial New Orleans, I also wanted to create a seamless immersion into the residential neighborhood, which I found exposure to in the porch assignment. I also addressed how different subgroups of the community would interact with the project and created different thresholds of engagement for public, communal, private, and nomadic use. Informing different thresholds within the block was an important design step as nomadic people lead uncommon lives. Nomadic and settled people speak of homes and space in words and assumptions that don't make sense to each other. Designing a commonwealth unshared with the settled majority is crucial in furnishing a sense of community and safety for a group unseen to the New Orleans eye. With all that in mind, I began designing. Traditional housing is rooted in design principles and programs for more permanent place-based housing. Nomadic housing is contingent on a sense of space, home, and community that is intimately related to moving over the land. In establishing a basis for the structure, I re-envisioned the urban grid and implemented an unconventional 30-degree grid informed by this unconventional manner of nomadic housing. This grid then produced a base for public and private structures. In terms of creating different thresholds of access, I altered the existing vehicular, public, and communal circulation of the block. Public access is defined by orthogonal movement, whereas communal access is defined by 30 and 60-degree entries and walkways. I also designed a gate that secures the community. Wait, sorry, that's for this one. I refined the community's intrinsic New Orleans value by designing an exterior patio that wraps around the structure and also created a columnar grid. I also designed an authentic community emblem that uses the Pontaba buildings as a precedent. The N stands for NOLA Nomads. I finally honed in on the manner in which the different categories of nomads, the public and the community, would use the space. On the ground floor, I designed an 8-slot RV parking lot for the auto nomads, 3 workspace buildings for the digital nomads, which are also open to the public in addition to a typical New Orleans exterior patio that wraps around the complex, and an interior courtyard for communal use. On the residential floors, there are 58 housing units for the leasing nomads and 12 campgrounds for the peripatetic nomads. This concept axonometrics facilitates a clear presentation of the specifics of the community. You can see the primitive geometric nature of the buildings and infrastructure, New Orleans idiosyncrasies, areas of community engagement, and the different spaces outlined for the nomads. The ground floor plan shows the communal areas, the different public and private buildings defined by the vertical course and the exterior patio imposed by the upper floors. This zoom of the ground floor plan that accentuates one of the public buildings on the left, the columnar grid, a private entry at 60 degrees, and then one of the communal buildings has 3 bathrooms and storage spaces for the campgrounds above, a communal laundry room, and a cafe. The second floor plan is a typical layout of the apartments. You'll note that on the exterior of the most apartments, pocket parks are used to create a division between units. Because the apartments are modular, they are easily subject to change within the perimeter of the walkway. Within this module, 4 campgrounds are included on each floor. On the third floor, the unit configuration changes and the voids in between the apartments are introduced in place of the lower pocket parks to create a sense of privacy. And finally, the unit configuration on the fourth floor plan is the same as the second. Here's a zoom of the second floor plan in which you can clearly see the pocket parks, typical unit configurations, and one of the campground sites. The inclusion of campgrounds was a key part of this project as peripatetic nomads are the architects behind the nomadic lifestyle. The act of camping is so appealing because it provides an escape from the permanent and invigorates the primal interest of living in a primitive hut, again redefining what it means to be houseless. Here's the urban block roof plan, which shows how the lot is integrated into the urban grid and how the 30-degree grid was refined within the block. There are 4 different unit configurations, the first being the 1 module with 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom, ideal for single or 2-person use. The second being the converted 1 module, still only with 1 unit, but a slightly larger floor plan, and 2 bedrooms and 1 bath, ideal for small families or roommates. The third being the 2 module, composed of 2 units with 3 bedrooms and 3 baths. This is ideal for medium-sized families. The last unit configuration is the 3 module, composed of 3 units with 5 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms, ideal for larger families. What makes this community unique is that all tenants are non-permanent. Leases for the units are renewable every 2 years, and all tenants pay dues to the homeowners association and collectively own the land. Visitors renting either an RV lot or a campground have a maximum of a 2-week stay. This regulation of residency ensures that all users stay true to their mobile nature. This first section shows the community with the site context and arrangement of units, public spaces, and pocket parks. My next section, did that work? No? Okay, wait, hold on. Okay. This sectional animation clearly illustrates the arrangement of nomadic spaces. Can you guys hear that?
Yes.
Okay. You can see the leased units, RV lots, the amphitheater in the courtyard, the adaptable campgrounds, the flexible workspaces, and the exterior patio. Here's a perspective of the amphitheater and the complex. Here's another perspective taken from the 3rd floor walkway, showing how elements of the 2nd floor pocket parks extend into the voids of the upper floors. And then I have one last animation to share. And you guys heard the last one, right? Oh wait, no, not this one. Where's it going? Hold on. Okay, for some reason the animation is not playing. I don't know why. Okay, here we go. Rome Sweet Rome rethinks how we understand campsites, explores new possibilities for architecture on wheels, transforms public spaces into flexible offices, and ultimately denies residential permanency. LaBelle Prusin, author of African Nomadic Architecture and current research associate at the National Museum of African Art, wrote in her book, "For the nomad, home cannot be understood except in terms of journey, just as space is defined by movement. Rome Sweet Rome embraces the roving lifestyle and fascinates the urban vagabond in its nomadic architecture." Thank you for listening. I'm going to share my presentation again.
Thank you, Will, for the presentation. Just to clarify a little bit, you mentioned something about the RVs on the ground floor, rentable space. Can you go back to that and show us how does that work? And how many of these can you have on that block?
All right. So on the ground floor plan, there's an 8-slot RV lot, and it redefines the vehicular circulation of the block and opens the road up into the middle of the block.
So the RVs can park in that area in the center. That's the 8 units?
Yes.
Got it. And do they have access to, let's say, water or any other facilities on the site, power?
This building right over here is designated for the RV lots, and it has bathrooms with showers, also storage spaces, and public restrooms. Yeah, and that's just for them.
The RVs are substituting units in the overall program, or is it an addition that you bring?
It's an addition. So the required unit we had to meet for this product was 60 units, and I had 58 units and then 12 campgrounds, and then the 8 slots for the RVs.
And you spoke about several kinds of nomadic life. Are there other ways in which this building hosts kind of temporary tenants, or everything else is fixed?
Everything, I'm not sure what you mean.
I mean, are there short-term units that people rent for, like shorter terms, like by monthly based, or other kind of more temporal ways of inhabiting, or everything else has a single tenant and it's fixed?
The maximum tenancy for one of the upper floor units is 2 years. However, it can be as short as possible. But after 2 years, you would have to renew your lease.
Okay.
On the ground floor where they were looking at, it seems like there's some type of amphitheater type. Is that what this is? that space that we're looking at? And how is that organized, and how do you see people using that space?
I really wanted to encourage community engagement within my complex. And this space is usually used, I researched a lot of nomadic compounds in Colorado, for example, and most of them had gathering spaces to eat together or just to have weekly meetings or whatever it may be. So I wanted to create a large space that could hold all of the tenants in one.
So that space can hold all the tenants at the same time?
Yeah, ideally, yes.
Shifting a little bit, in terms of the questions, your units, you have, it seems, two type of units, the circular one and the square one. What motivated the geometrical choices of a circular plan versus the square one, and how these two things are working together?
Well, all of the previous projects of my semester have included shapes such as circles and squares, and I really wanted to reemphasize that and include them in this in a 30 and 60 degree manner. There's also a third shape. It's this one right here, the pentagon, or pentagon shape, that is also combined with them too in these larger units, and can also be a singular unit.
But in fact, it's not that they are working together, they are independent. So either you have the circular, which is not a complete circle, it's always kind of truncated. And then you have the square unit type, and they have a link between them. So when you're showing the 3-bedroom or the larger units where they have both the square plan and the circular plan, they're not combined together per se. They're juxtaposed. They're sitting next to each other. How do you see that working? Is that the extent that, do you think that there's something about the dialogue between ultimately what is cylindrical in these more rectilinear spaces? How do you see these two things working spatially? There was one image where on one of the walkways outside, if you want to go back to it and describe how these spaces are working together.
Was it this one?
It was a rendering of an outdoor space. Yes. Can you describe a little bit more that experience of having being in that space?
In the walkway space from the different modules?
Yes.
Yeah. So it was kind of a precedent that I continued throughout my entire semester. In my sectional home unit, I only use exterior walkways to connect the shapes, just to preserve that sort of primitive geometric nature. And I wanted to do the same in this project as well. And also, it also helps creating a grid that is adaptable. If you go back to one of the floor plans, had I combined them into singular shapes, it would have been much more difficult to create this sort of adaptable grid that can be changed on the upper floors.
But also it seems that you have an intention of bringing some of the structure to the outside and make it very present. Is that correct?
Yes.
What is the motivation behind that?
I'm not sure if I had one. I honestly just really like the idea of moving from one shape to the other and sort of having different spaces. The nomadic architecture in itself is using a space at different times, at different days, and in different areas. So I really like the idea of moving from one module to the other.
But the idea of nomadic, conceptually, the nomad, or if you think about it, how it can translate as an idea to architecture is to be able to have flexibility, correct, in the way in your location, in the way you do your activities. We were talking about Elizabeth project earlier, and this idea of these unprogrammed spaces and how these can be used in different ways. And to me, that create interesting flexibility in the way you can imagine architecture. It's unusual, as I stated earlier. As architects, we like to prescribe things very much so, and say this is how people will design it. And to me, in your project, I'm lacking a little bit of that flexibility, which goes hand in hand with the idea of nomad. Even the amphitheater appears to be very very well thought out and prescribed in a way that the seating, the way people are seated, the way where the stage is, the dimension of the stage, everything is very prescribed. And there is a lack of flexibility. I would have imagined that for someone who's advocating for nomad practices, there will be a little bit more flexibility in your project. Do you see that, or do you think that you achieved some flexibility in the idea of nomad in your project?
I mean, I certainly think I achieved a certain level of flexibility. As I explained before, the shapes are placed on a grid, and if they were combined into one shape, it would have been harder to have that grid.
For me, it's. I mean, I see the concerns or the question that Amar is posing here. There's a certain how can I say it? There's a bit of a confusion on whether what is the priority in this space. I think there's a lot of emphasis on the formal composition of the geometry, which is, I have to admit, is very attractive and very beautifully articulated. From the ground floor plan to the upper levels, and how geometrically how you combine and play with the shapes, it shows a high level of craft on your end. But at the same time, architecturally produces some questions that are a bit tricky. Of course, a project that is taking so many bold moves, it will naturally produce ambiguities. But for me, basically, if we see your unit, you have those almost privated shapes, like manipulated slightly, but most importantly, everything comes with a sort of ring around that corridor, which makes us think of a porch a little bit, maybe. Of course, is there to resolve circulation, I guess. The question is whether this corridor, this ring, is always necessary to be there, or if it could be abstracted or removed in some cases. I mean, I see that in some locations you're combining them to create larger platforms between units. But there are some weird leftovers where there's a very small hole looking down, or I guess looking up. And I'm wondering if this could be further exploded to a point that those shapes could gain even more independence, and at the same time activate those corridors in a more powerful way. I think now it's standing somewhere in between, trying to be tight to create some sort of compact block, but also being detached. And I would explore this the independent volumes much more. I think it would generate a very interesting kind of field of those individual, almost tower-like structures, rather than trying to fit them in a more conventional kind of block organization. I also think, I mean, the ground floor is very interesting, and again, your ability to work out the geometry is fantastic. I don't quite understand the 30-degree grid. It seems I'm not sure if it's. I think you also said that it's kind of an arbitrary decision. It doesn't come from the site or from orientation or certain views, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you because I have to move from the room. There's still a couple minutes left. Just thank you, both of you, for the comments, and Will for the presentation.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.
So I'm not sure how convincing that is. I would rethink it. But most importantly, I think what is fascinating about this project is this idea of the RV inhabiting part of the courtyard. And I'm wondering if we could take this to a much more extreme and radical level. Well, the whole ground floor could be an RV park where those RVs could basically, and maybe there are more of them, occupy spaces within the courtyard in a much more free fashion. And actually the geometry of the circle that you're using, it's kind of suggesting some sort of turning radius where a car or a small van in this case could turn around and inhabit this courtyard much more graciously.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're somewhat out of time at this point.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm wrapping up.
Okay. Sorry.
I don't think that allocating a particular space for the RVs is as powerful. It kind of segregates them a bit. I mean, it would be very interesting, for example, to see them under the building. I don't know if you've seen, if you've been around, and I think it happens a lot around in Louisiana, where people would have the shed next to their house where they put their RV underneath to protect it from the sun. So they go into the RV with their AC, but they have this extra canopy that provides additional insulation. And at the end of the day, it would be an amazing way to organize this courtyard as a public space that works for both vehicles that are performing limited movements, maneuvers within that field, and a space that also works for the inhabitants of this community.
Thank you very much, Amar and Kyriakos, for your feedback. Thank you very much, Will, for your presentation.
Thank you, Will. Good job. Well done.
Thank you.
So we're going with Mia now.
Yeah, I can share my screen.
Thank you, Mia.
Oh, okay. Okay. Hi, my name is Mia Cutchins. I'm a second-year undergraduate student, and my professor is Professor Lockhart Milan this semester. My project is entitled Rainwater Collective Housing, as it both collects rainwater as well as being an aggregated housing unit. Little double meaning there. In the main isometric, we can see circular woods, whose purpose is to collect the rainwater, which irrigates various apothecaric herbs on the site. In the horizontal and sectional homes, I began experimenting with the ways that curves and orthogonal shapes interact, especially having circular forms like push and pull through the orthogonal ones. And I kind of tried to adopt this strategy by having circular subtractions in this project as a means of collecting rainwater efficiently. The site is completely filled with individual houses, as well as having 2 storefronts, and the existing nature on the site was a big source of inspiration for me in terms of where my units were placed. And the trees were clearly a beloved aspect within the community and had been there for decades. So in terms of the type of people that I envision in the intentional community, it would be people who are looking for natural alternatives to their ailments and desire to infuse an appreciation for and collaboration with nature into their daily lives through the practice of gardening, as well as organizing the units around water. They can live a more intentional and interconnected life with the natural world around them. So because of this, anyone from students to small families would be able to inhabit these spaces. It's more of a philosophy than any physical kind of person who could be able to live there. And in terms of some inspiration, first I referenced various sculptures by Edward Chida, whose work explores the way that simple geometric forms and their links can create a physical and visceral experience for the viewer, as well as the Sendai Mediatek by Toyo Ito, which is a combination of orthogonal and circular forms and subtractions, which explore a more porous interaction with the fabric of the local community. And finally, I referenced the Holly Grove Shade and Water Pavilion, which was designed at the Albert and Tina Design Small Center. It's a community amenity that focuses on rainwater collection, and its physical form becomes an area to generate curiosity and connection. Yeah, so the forms are derived from blocks with cylindrical subtractions, and the units also are organized around these subtractions. As we can see, I'll get more into it in this central diagram. The parts of the units that touch the cylindrical void are also the wet zones. And here I have a diagram of the water collection, the unit organization, as well as the apothecary on the site. So the water collection happens in 11 different spaces that the units are organized around. And on the ground floor, there are washing and drying units that utilize that gray water, and as well as a water processing area that converts the water into usable water. Here we have a typical floor plan, and along these circular areas that would be the ones kind of touching the void is where we have the wet zones, such as kitchens, baths, and further laundry areas. And finally, on the floor plan, there's 4 different apothecary herbs and 3 different physical areas that are centered around apothecary. So starting at the top and going clockwise, we have evening primrose, which focuses on heart health, nerve and bone pain. And the space that follows it is an apothecary processing area. The next plant is a passion flower, which relieves insomnia, stress, and general pains. The next space is a greenhouse that would grow the starts for the plants when they're smaller before they can actually be farmed. After that, there's a lemon balm plant, which improves cognitive function, eases insomnia, and reduces anxiety. And then there's a shed that would just hold general gardening supplies. And finally, there's ginger root, which is an anti-inflammatory and immunity booster. And all of the apothecary herbs were chosen specifically as ones that are meant to kind of combat the ailments that we feel as a result of modern life, both in terms of like the pace and sitting at a computer for a really long time. That was something that I wanted to focus on, finding a natural alternative to. Here we have a site plan showing the surrounding context of the blocks. as well as the average floor plan. And on this average, the last one was a ground plan. And on the average floor plan, we can see that there are some various like flat platforms between connecting the vertical cores to the entrances of each unit. And on these platforms, there are various places to generate connections through the community with programmatic functions such as picnic tables, shared gardens that encircle the subtractions, workout areas, as well as a shared small library for reading. Oh, I think I skipped that. Yeah, so in my first section, you can see the height change along the cover that goes over the walkways, and the intention behind these like curved forms at the top level is just to further the rainwater collection, so that as well as like physically shielding the people who are walking, because New Orleans does suck to get stuck in the rain, as I'm sure we've all experienced. So I definitely wanted to make sure I incorporated covered walkways. And then we can also see these rainwater collection areas, as well as some people utilizing the farming areas on the ground floor. So for my small unit, it is 595 square feet and houses 1 to 2 people. It is 1 bed and 1 bath, and there are 27 of these small units total throughout the project. In the medium unit, it is 1,000. There's 2 medium units, just to clarify, and they're both 1,200 square feet. They house 2 to 3 people each and are both 2 bed, 1 bath, and there's 16 of these combined units total. And finally, in the large unit, there is it's 1,430 square feet, houses 3 to 4 people. It's a 3 bed, 2 bath, and there's 16 total of these. And in terms of the experience, in this worm's eye view axonometric, we can see the ways that the rainwater collection is supposed to function, channeling all of it through these central boards. And then in this first perspective, you can see an interaction between the sky and the railing with the aforementioned like gardens that grow around it. And in this second perspective, I wanted to show the ways that the vegetation was being used, as well as the connection to the sidewalk. In the final perspective, I wanted to show the ways that the building form also highlights the sky when you're under it. Yeah, and then this is my final axonometric that it's a diptych that just shows both the vegetation and the rainwater collection in a more abstracted way. And we can go to the concept board, but I also have a quick animation to show, which is an axonometric view from the rainwater collection areas all the way to the top with the covered walkways. Yeah, thank you. Should I go to concept board or?
Thank you, Mia. I guess you can stay at the presentation and we can go back to some of the images that you were showing.
Okay.
Oh, we have Rafael here. Welcome, Rafael.
Thank you, Guillermo.
Thank you very much for coming.
Of course. Thank you very much for the invitation.
We're glad having you here also.
Okay, great. Is there a concept board link that I can look at? If you
Yeah, I will send it right now. I will put it in the chat right now.
Thank you.
Maybe I can start with the question of the height, Mia. You have a building that is 5-story high. I imagine there were no restrictions for the city in terms of height of the building.
Yeah, there were.
We looked at some projects this afternoon where the units were more spread out, and it seems that your intention is to go more vertically. Can you talk a little bit about the reasons behind your decisions?
Yeah, definitely. I can go to a plan as well. Let's see. Let me reshare my presentation. Sorry, I don't know why it's not. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. So the main reasoning behind my organization was to be around the trees that already existed. And I wanted to maximize the like untouched ground floor space. And I didn't want to have big blocks of buildings that were covering areas that could grow vegetation, as well as having like more porous entrances to the surrounding area instead of having our super defined perimeter. I feel like it was really important for me that the project was about organic alternatives. And so it didn't really make sense for me to impose like a harsh border given that philosophy. So yeah, I guess a combination of a few different reasons.
And you describe these communal spaces between the units as spill out or spaces where things can be organized more freely. But they seem to be all kind of introverted or looking at the inside versus outside or connected to the rest of the site. Is that also, you know, I imagine this is your intention here as well.
By introverted, do you mean like more private?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, let's say, the top right building, if you look at the grade area outside of the units, it is almost framed by the units, and it seems more like an outdoor space, but surrounded by the units, rather than something that is open to the outside.
Yeah. Well, I was mainly just focused on having a combination of public and private outdoor spaces. So the ones that are the semicircles are private, like terraces. And the program that I was talking about occurs like within this organic forms that are touching the vertical cores as well. But I was definitely trying to make sure that there are as many different kinds of outdoor interactions possible within the organization of the units.
In the other aspect of the project, it's, you know, it seems that you opted for something that is repetitive, meaning that you always, you know, it's despite the fact that it's 5-story tall, besides the ground floor, all the floors are the same, they repeat.
Yeah, there's like 1 or 2 variations. Like I subtracted some units in certain areas just so that there would be like more light available at every level. But it's almost exactly the same. Yeah.
Can you show us where you subtracted some of the units? Do you have these plans or?
Yeah. Let me go to like this section. Sorry, my Acrobat is taking a while to load. Oh, I guess I didn't cut through any of the areas where it is. I can show you can see it in the isometric though. So on this one, this unit is 1 story shorter, and there's one missing right there, as well as right there. Yeah.
Okay.
But they all have the same form, definitely repeated in that one.
I mean, definitely there's something about, you know, the repetitiveness in terms of efficiency of construction and cost and all of that. but also there is the lack of variety in, you know, in the way your experience is in those spaces. We looked at, again, you know, some projects this afternoon where you had, even if the units were the same, but the fact that, you know, kind of the spatial organization with the terraces created and outdoor spaces were shifting, created more variety in in the experience than what you have here. How, again, I'm going to go to my, I guess, question for this afternoon, and the idea of materiality. What do you see your building made out of, and how does it fit in that context?
Yeah, well, I was thinking that my building would be made out of wood and steel. So the steel would be a support on the walkways, as well as, since I don't have any of the units touching the ground floor, I would have steel beams supporting them. Just because otherwise they would fall. But I wanted to have wood because I just thought that it would incorporate with the like organic focus better than concrete or all steel.
Another question, now that I'm looking at this isometric view, when you're setting back from the property line, you're creating that open space. Do you see that as a public space, or do you see that as a private space for the residents?
I see it as a public space, definitely.
So anyone can walk up to the building itself?
Yeah, and that's part of why I didn't want to have any units on the ground floor. Because I feel like these are the kinds of natural alternatives that could be useful to anyone, and I wanted to make sure that it was kind of like antithetical to, or like the antithesis of modern life, which would be like privatized medical solutions. Yeah.
So you said it's concrete? You said you're thinking in concrete?
No, I was thinking wood and steel combined, but mostly wood.
You said, sorry, say again, wood, you said?
Wood, yeah. And then steel beams to support at the bottom level.
Right. I think the question of the material and the form are totally related, and that's why probably Amar is asking. I don't know. I feel this building. When I see this building, I see a concrete materiality that is related to the liberty of the form you're using to make this quasi typographical plan. I really celebrate your skills on populating these forms with a clear architectural capacity. And I think that is a fantastic to see in these plans. So Milla, thank you for showing us this work, and congratulations for achieving this goal. A question could be in the background of the topic, gardening and greenhousing and things as such related to these kind of more pomo quasi-typographical logics of the plan that are, giving a lot to discuss. And I think this is a very provocative topic that might be in other questions. Productive, I mean, provocative but productive. I really enjoy something else, which is the space that is between the units, which is for me probably the most powerful space you have, right? The empty big space that is between them. It looks like there something might happen beyond the liberty of the space. It looks like actual engines for constructing the society that will be harvesting the ground floor, and I like that part. And I don't know. I think, I don't know what you think, Kyriakos, you are like a wise person looking graphics, and this idea of postmodernism and super typographical things are appealing to me in this project. I don't know what others think.
I also love the efforts, and I think it's very intelligently resolved in taking those letters, as you say, and making words with them. So I think the letter works. I mean, as a letter, we can describe the unit. Word would be the building, like those independent ones. I'm not sure we're getting a good sentence, though. in the end, in terms of the overall thing, the overall collaboration of these individual buildings in one whole. I mean, I really appreciate your efforts to maintain trees, to be very sensitive about the site, and thus kind of trying to constrain your footprint. But this has a counter effect of forcing you to go really high, and this is maybe slightly compromising your courtyards in some locations where they become very narrow, and at least the way they seem on this beautiful axonometric that we see here, they seem quite dark. And I think there would be very interesting ways to open it up. Also, these intermediate platforms that could be penetrated in several ways to allow more light to come down, and also kind of more three-dimensional views between different levels. And I also think what's really missing is a convincing gesture about the collection of water, which you emphasized a lot, and I think is a beautiful idea. But it doesn't deliver a certain a building form that works this way, like the precedents you showed us. Like we can think also of Corbu, Chandigarh, and all Ronsham, when he sculpts the whole roof to collect the water in one trench, and like so many other examples. And I think this three-dimensionality is lacking from your roofscape, and could be quite amazing.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think, I don't know, do you think you are the author of this project? I think is a very talented work at all levels, but are you conscious of this kind of the divorce that exists between the chosen form and the old environmental capacities of it working with the greenery? You see what I'm talking about, Mia?
Like in terms of how it's kind of like a blocky imposition a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there is a clear graphical intention in the form, right? I think there you're playing a very interesting role as designer. The question is if this is the form that allows, permits, support this other thing, which is nature as a construction material, right? The nature grows with different speeds, it needs specific environmental conditions and so on. I'm jumping to a discourse that is a little bit more engaged with what nature means for architecture and how engage with the form, right? So that part, I think the materiality you're appointing verbally is a very attractive material. I don't know how much this form is aligned, this material is aligned with this form. And there are interesting conflicts here that could be productive for you as designer. Mm-hmm. So I think there is a topic hovering here that is very productive. What overall I want to say is very productive, and I'm totally agree with the comments. Like I guess the comment of Amar related to the materialities is inviting me to think this intense relationship, but also the comments of Kyriakos, which is the sentence of the whole thing, and that is a beautiful way of putting a critical thinking on the whole complex. I think it's very attractive, but it's very problematic, and that is I think that is a good thing. I really think it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the question of the found landscape on the site and your attention to it is a very noble one and interesting one. But one would wonder to what extent, as Kyriakos was saying, to what extent you want to reinforce that, and where is that fine line between saying, well, there are trees on the site, I want to maintain as many as possible, considering that you're building a 5-story building, chances are anyway, you're going to need some foundations and disruption of the site, and not a lot of the trees that you will find on the site or that exist on the site will survive that. But besides that point, you know, looking at the end result of your project and the form and how prescribed the form is, one would question to what extent what you're pushing forward as this idea of keeping the trees is true, and where, you know, it kind of just an excuse to, you know, to do what you want to do, and there's nothing wrong about that. Don't get me wrong. You know, if you think of, let's say, Sana project for the Serpentine Pavilion that they did in the UK, their intention was clearly to make, you know, it was a pavilion, very light structure in this park, and their intention was to keep the trees, the existing trees, and create this pavilion and that roof between the existing landscape, around the existing landscape. And if you look at this project, you see that the form is much more organic in a way, because it is trying to negotiate the terrain in the existing landscape. Where here, you know, there is a set of repetitions that are happening in rotations, to the extent where one wonders to, you know, to what extent your intention is true to reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I feel like there's kind of always going to be that tension between like construction and retention of what's there. And I don't necessarily feel like there's one answer that even I could get like within this project, or like in the differences between like mine and Sanaz. Like,
I mean, one way to deal with it, sorry to interrupt, you know, is to really map the site and look at every tree that is on site and see what are the trees that are worth keeping, and be selective in your decision, and say, you know, most trees are, you know, a few years or a few decades old, and they can be easily replaced, or, you know, but there are one or two maybe that are really important and that are extremely old and you want to maintain, in which case a selective selection could be more beneficial than a blanket, let's keep all the trees, you know, and work the project around it, because you would hope that also your architecture will be there for a while. And if people are going to be using it for decades to come, you don't want it to be constrained by something that, a tree that, you know, will not last more than a few years after construction.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We need to wrap up. I'm really sorry, because this is really interesting, and I wish we had more time, but we need to go to the next student, and I'm gonna leave, and I'm gonna thank first Omar, Rafael, and Kyriakos for their valuable feedback to Mia, and of course Mia for your presentation. So I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Guillermo.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the share.
So we are going to hear from Chase. Chase, are you ready?
Yes, hi.
Perfect.
Let me screen share. Okay, can you all see this?
Yes.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Chase Iskett, and I am a second-year undergrad student with Professor Norman in her section. The title of this project is Les Colonnades. The site is located 2 blocks behind the Academy of the Sacred Heart private school on St. Charles Avenue in Uptown New Orleans. The current built condition of the site is a series of timber frame single family and duplex houses which date from the 1890s to around the 1910s. All of the houses face the street, with the center of the block consisting of private backyards delineated by fences. 3 existing buildings are set to be retained: a private duplex, French Truck Coffee Shop, and Charlie's Steakhouse. Having always had a fascination with and deep appreciation for New Orleans and its rich cultural history, the context of the city and appropriateness therein was at the forefront of the motivations for this design. Conceptually, the project originated from the idea of taking elements of the city, such as the French Quarter, Audubon Park, the French Market, and coffee and beignet shops, all of which are emblematic of the civic nature of the city, and incorporating them into this one urban block. Looking at the ground floor plan, we can begin to understand the project organizationally and programmatically. As the title of the project suggests, colonnades are a major element of the design. Here, the column is used as an organizational device to delineate space, separating public from private, street frontage from block interior, and covered sidewalk from open ground, which creates a rich and dynamic array of outdoor spaces. The arrangements of shops on the ground floor makes for densification at the street, referencing the typical layout of the French Quarter, and result in large open air spaces in the middle of the block, emblematic of the iconic New Orleans courtyard. Large open air hallways provide connection from the street to the middle of the block. Store program includes a bakery, pastry shop, butcher, antique store, flower shop, bookstore, cafe, restaurant, art gallery, music store, and clothing store. The open courtyards are used as opportunities to recreate the atmosphere of Audubon Park here in this pocket park here. Cafe Beignet in this area with an outdoor stage and dining tables, and the French Market in this area, which has been designed as a farmer's market in this stretch of colonnade where gardeners can pull straight from the large community garden servicing the urban block as well as the surrounding community. Everything on the ground floor is open and accessible to the public, but privatization is prioritized on upper floors. Here, looking at a typical floor plan, we can see that this section is dedicated as a student wing and that this section is the family wing. The large corner blocks serve as meeting spaces that are accessible from and connect all of the units to provide a space for recreation, socialization, community cooking, studying, and reading. Most of the family units have private balconies which face the street to provide outdoor spaces for them, which brings us to the unit types. Unit type A was designed for a family of 5. This unit is the largest and provides space for 4 bedrooms, 2 full bathrooms, an open kitchen, living room, and balcony space. Unit type B was designed for a young single professional, and unit type C for couples. Both units are similar to a studio apartment with 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, kitchen, living, and outdoor space. Unit type D, the smallest unit, was designed for students, with each one having its own bathroom, living area, and bedroom area. Students do not get private balconies, but all student units are accessed from common balcony spaces. Here are 2 sections cut axially through the colonnades, which show the inner courtyard spaces. As stated, this project was heavily influenced by the vernacular architecture of New Orleans and makes no qualms about expressing this relationship with its sense of traditionalism. However, the goal here is not to merely copy historic forms for the sake of reiteration. As we can see in this elevation, this project breaks away from the mold of New Orleans traditionalism with its materiality, being a radical departure from the brick and cypress the city was largely built from. Instead, standing seam galvanized metal siding is utilized, referencing the look of clapboard that is ubiquitous to American residential houses, but installed on the diagonal and scaled up to further decontextualize and defamiliarize oneself with these traditional materials. Additionally, steel cables are strung along the street front to define the entrance to the open air hallways for vines to eventually grow on. With regard to the material expression of the columns, I was inspired by an art installation by Eduardo Tresoli, where self-supporting wire mesh sculptures take on the form of classical buildings and architectural elements with remarkably high fidelity. Here we see the process of a traditional Tuscan column in the round going through a series of manipulations, eventually being expressed in this grid of wire mesh. Through this material expression, the wire mesh column becomes a commentary on how any attempt To use a solid volumetric classical column in architecture today would be very problematic in accordance with contemporary construction methods, since it would require a hidden support in the middle to actually carry the structural load, and would therefore not be a truthful expression of materials or methods. This way, the column becomes a ghost of itself, or a memory, allowing the project to engage in seamless dialogue with the many columned houses of New Orleans, but while also simultaneously unafraid to make its own statement of modernity. Moving forward, we can see this method of representation employed to create a classically modern atmosphere and perspective view. Here, looking at the project diagonally from the opposite street corner. Here, standing at the end of the longest stretch of colonnade, and here in the student courtyard. In all, this is a project which utilizes architectural devices that are iconic and ubiquitous to New Orleans, namely the column, porch, and courtyard, combined and arranged in ways that at once celebrates the architectural history of New Orleans, while also readapting them to create an equitable design that responds to issues of population rise and urban densification. And that's my project.
I don't know. I don't know if it was. I really like something that you bring through the images, which is the unexpected transparency. So I think that part was very beautiful because it was a turning point of what are you doing here. Initially, I was reading the plans and the drawings close to Kohlhoff or Ungers, these projects and lobbies of postmodern architecture. That I think it was typologically is very interesting. So I think you did a very good argument, Chase, to arrive to this point. I really celebrate that part. It is provocative at the point of empowering this imaginary of more as I said before, postmodern imaginary, but at the same time brings this idea of the transparency, which completely destroy the embodiment of materials and other forms. Are you envisioning these colonnades being transparent as the artists that you presented?
Yes, I think it would be really interesting, as we can see in like this drawing here, I think it would be really interesting to have the thicker columns expressed in this wire mesh, but then you would be able to see directly through it and see that just, the pipe that's actually carrying the structural load. Because, like in modern buildings that might have fake columns on it, it's hiding that steel pipe that is still behind it, so it's kind of lying to us in a way. But this material expression allows us to see the truth of the construction method while also at the same time relating to the historic context of a city. Yeah, so I think it would be really interesting to have that transparency that you speak of.
Have you seen the works of Leon Krier?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. No, I think it is is a very beautiful collection of drawings. I really, especially these ones with the clouds and presenting this perspective as a representational system to explore this architecture. I think for a second year student is fantastic. I think that maybe this threshold of credibility that the project as a kind of combination of things, plans, sections, but also these drawings, I think the threshold of credibility is very high. And then when you arrive to that point, I think you're bringing this materiality, which is transparent. I wonder how much this new condition of the materiality versus the solidity of these imaginaries could bring us a completely different architecture with transparency, ghost elements, but also what happened in the time through these elements that are wires and pipes and so on. I don't know, I'm very, very intrigued and fascinated. Also, you're using a plan that is typologically very interesting in terms of, you know, corridors, patios, and how these people engage with these spaces. There is another architect that is coming to my mind when you're bringing these forms, of course, Aldo Rossi and the works he did in Sevilla that are not very well known, but I think there is a bias of this project that I wonder if you were discussing with Carrie at some point in this project.
Yeah, I would say that there were definitely inherent biases within this project for me starting out. I'm a pretty traditional person in terms of architecture, and historic architecture is something that I'm very interested in. So we had a lot of conversations about translation rather than reiteration, and trying to manipulate form and change it and make it something different rather than reinstating what's already been done. So yeah, we talked a lot about that.
Great. Congratulations. I like it.
I have to applaud your investigation, Chase, since I've been talking about materiality since the beginning of the afternoon. I remember seeing your project at midterm, and I'm happy to see that you took the second half of the semester to do this material investigation. It's great to see that happening already in second year, where materiality becomes a very important component of the design itself, because that's rare. Having said that, the inspirational reference that you're doing with sculptures, they are always, you know, when you at least the photographs that you're showing them, they are seen in a context almost with no context. So there is no background. The background is the sky or the natural environment. And here, your investigation of these columns, the colonnades, is in reality, you have the building behind them, and the building is cladded with the metal.
Mm-hmm.
So the building is still very present, and the idea of the transparency is very limited to very select columns that you're presenting or that you're selecting along the way, because the rest of the columns, the colonnade, are just the small support elements that are not wrapped with that. So I like where this is going. I think it's the beginning of something, and I would encourage you to try to push further the idea of materiality and investigating materiality in architecture. You know, how does the diagonal seams on the metal cladding that you're suggesting on the building works with these colonnades that are made out of this mesh, and how the whole thing worked together. You know, you didn't talk much about the roof. How does that fit into the rest of the architecture? Maybe you can tell us a little bit. We see some, the pitched roof coming all the way to the front, and we start to read some of that. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you're envisioning this detail.
Right. Actually, thank you for bringing that up. The roof structure is kind of an important element of this project, but I was just trying to get my script together, and I hadn't quite got to that point yet. But yeah, so you were kind of speaking on how the mesh materiality of the columns is just kind of standing alone with the column and maybe not relating too much else with the building. But the mesh materiality of the column extends to the roof. So my professor and I, Carrie, we also had a lot of conversations about roof form and different options and what might work. And ultimately, we came to the conclusion that any roof form that made a volumetric space within was not really necessary, because the project is 3 stories high, and with that 3 stories, it accommodates all of the units that we needed to have. So there wasn't really any necessity for an attic space. So I kind of thought it best to have this open air tectonic roof form that would provide shade so that then you could utilize the roof surface as roof gardens for each of the units to access through the vertical core. And then here I can, for this point, I think it's, well, this works. Yeah, so the mesh materiality of the column is also brought here to this pedimented facade. That is kind of yet another commentary on historic faux pas in architecture. A lot of times in like Greek Revival New Orleans houses, you'll see this one really big grand pediment, and then you turn the corner only to realize that it doesn't actually extend to the whole roof. It's just on the front, and then you have a very normal hipped roof that kind of awkwardly collides with the back of it. So this is a reference to that kind of where you do have this standalone facade, but then instead of it being this awkward faux pas thing that isn't actually supposed to be there, it becomes something that you can actually go up and interact with up on the roof and see it. It forms a barrier wall, a protective barrier wall, so of course you don't fall off of the roof. But also it kind of creates this framework for vines to eventually grow up and kind of take over the project, which that in and of itself is another connection to, like, you know, New Orleans vernacular. There's plants everywhere, so I think it would be interesting to see plants just kind of growing all over this wire mesh, growing up the columns, going up to the roof.
Am I glad I came this afternoon? Isn't that an important aspect of your project? I think this, you know, this takes a whole different dimension now that you're mentioning this, because I felt, you know, despite, again, the effort that you were showing in talking about materiality, I thought the columns were a little bit falling a little bit short in terms of how, you know, standing against the mass of the building. Now that you're integrating the roof structure or the pitched roof into that mesh, that takes a whole different dimension. And I think an important and very interesting one, because now the columns are not in isolation, but it becomes this almost, you know, an element or a structure of itself. And you know, I imagine it was very difficult to depict that in, you know, in drawing forms, because you can imagine that the experience with light qualities throughout the day would you know, will render this in a variety of ways that could be extremely interesting. So now you can imagine almost this cage that is set on the building itself, that has, you know, it's almost as if it's the shadow of the traditional sitting on what appears to be a very industrial, you know, if we're talking about a metal cladding interior or a volume, and that you know, this mesh is just the ghost of the traditional, kind of encapsulating the new and create a really interesting dialogue. Right. So I think it's really important, in the way you describe your project is really important to mention that, because now the whole project is taking on a whole different dimension.
Yeah,
maybe you need to think about your narrative also, and how you know, you're talking, because it's not just the colonnade. To me, the colonnade and the roof become, you know, this one element that is the wrapper of that box, that metal box that is inside of it, and has, you know, the meaning of, you know, the traditional, the ghost, the you know, that is just the wrapper. So it's really important to you know, weave that into the narrative.
Yes, definitely.
Well, I think, I mean, I love it that it's becoming this sort of wireframe building, which it comes out of a celebration of local typology. I mean, I absolutely appreciate one of your first drawings where you go and draw the elevations of the existing buildings, which is a super mature and invested process of really understanding what is there, instead of simply representing them as volumes, as we could expect. And kind of then taking this building and breaking it apart and then bringing it back as a new sort of statement. But I think with your if we follow the steps you're taking, it becomes something completely different. It becomes this kind of three-dimensional framework where many things could happen in very unexpected ways. And I'm wondering if your perspectives could work more towards that direction of less austerity and less rosy, but actually implying the ways that this is being occupied, either by the possible growth of vegetation vertically or horizontally, but also by the potential misuse by the tenants or the potential in habitation in more intimate ways where people might start hanging things from the wireframe or interpreting them in ways that are not necessarily part of their absolute pure nature. I think this idea of controversy that you're bringing of a column that is a column but is not a column, it could expand also in your understanding of how the project is being inhabited, and I think that could be super fascinating.
I would like to drop just a comment that is inspired by this work. The more and more I'm getting into the project, I feel it's a beautiful encounter where architecture is the embodiment of all these things. As you were saying, you're talking on the materiality and you're bringing these colonnades and the Kyriakos, you're appointing this thing of drawing the things to learn from there instead of the volumes. And the comments that Amar is opening with the materiality too, it looks like a very good example to talk architecture beyond its formal intentions, but also as a place or net where things are getting more and more wave. I love how this project is waving relationship between history, typology, materiality. For example, there is a particular detail here, which is the floor plates. The ceiling, the floor plates are drawn as deserving attention to the ceilings, but the thickness of them are not exactly what these will be related to these ceilings, but are completely doable technically. So there is a symbolic layer that this project is representing very well, but is bringing these other multiple layers of things related to what we have been discussing before, right? And I like how this project empowers the multiplicity of things related to temporality in architecture, for example, versus style, versus materiality, opacity versus transparency, and so on. And I don't know how much you are conscious or aware about these things, but I do like how this project is so in relationship with its own mode of being and the past of this history, right? Of this perspective, for example, right? It empowers the more and more that architecture is beyond the form, is how it establishes an embodiment of surrounding things that are physical, but also temporal, cultural, historical, and so on. So I really celebrate this exercise.
So now I think this is really interesting. Can you go back to the image that you were showing before? Because now we're going, beyond the materiality into the tectonics and the idea of tectonics and how things are put together. And I'm wondering to what extent I was kind of making my own reading of your project, which it's interesting. And even if we're talking about the same thing, multiple projects can come out of what you're describing. just via tectonics. When I was talking about the idea of, this wrapper or kind of mesh box that is wrapping or kind of encapsulating the old, once you start looking at images like this, or even the roof, on the facade, you're expressing not the mesh, but something else, the metal. So, all of a sudden that choice kind of goes against the idea of the wrapper, so encapsulating the box. The fact that you're showing the slab edge, maybe also goes against that. So to Raphael's comment, I don't know to what extent, you're conscious of all the details or the choices you're making and how important they are at this level, and become important in your, it's not just about graphics, it's about concepts and ideas and how they are interpreted in architecture or implemented in architecture. So, obviously there are possibly multiple projects here, and we're all kind of going our own way in reading, our own ideas of what this project is, which is really interesting at this point, considering that it's a one semester project and where you are in your education, to bring all this into the conversation. This is really interesting, and you should be applauded for it and aware, and try to, moving forward, build on that, because that's, if you're saying that you're interested in more traditional architecture, and you're doing this material investigation that is questioning, the way we perceive traditional architecture, that's a really interesting topic then that you can carry on for for your entire career. And just the fact that in a project at this at this level, we're beyond the planned organization of the spaces and whether they work or not. And we went through this at midterm. The fact that we're having a much more fundamental conversation about architecture and what architecture is to me really interesting.
That's these are great comments. That's particularly a great comment to end on, and Chase and I greatly appreciate the generous comments on this project. And Amar, I'm particularly pleased that you got to see both the mid-review and the final review of Chase's work. I think his project sort of taps into territory that your own research investigates with your research studio. Chase, I just want to say it's been delightful speaking with you throughout the course of the semester. The term maturity was thrown around during your comments, and that term really, when I think of you, I think of maturity, and I think that you are a very mature designer. And you have a very mature sense of self and what your kind of interests and passions are. And that's a really remarkable place to be at such a young age. So I think this conversation, or these series of conversations, offers great clarity, I think, for you on how to finish the project, on what you need to do with these images. And I'm happy to continue working with you so that we see it to its full potential. With that, Chase was the last student of this session, so we're all invited. I need to move to another room to see my last student's project, and you are all invited to join another room. And then again at 5:30, joining back up in the main room for final wrap-up comments. So thank you so much, Raphael, Kyriakos, and Amar. These were terrific comments for Chase.
Thank you, everyone. Congratulations on the beautiful work.
Yeah, thank you. I echo this voice.
Thank you for all your feedback.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you very much. Excellent dialogue. You all have a good day.
You too.
Yeah, thank you.